Talk us firstly, what is happening in Bakhmut?
Yeah, well, for the region, winter's fast approaching. The rains have arrived, and whilst that doesn't stop the fighting, it makes off-road fighting very difficult for heavy vehicles. So we're rapidly approaching the position where life will pause. The winter can't come soon enough for Russian forces. Their military is beleaguered. They're being pushed back in so many areas. The one anomaly, though, is in Bakhmut, where they are throwing a lot of forces at the fight there. Endless attacks is how President Zelensky described it. It looks like they're using a lot of their newly formed reservists, and by countless attacks is causing a huge amount of casualties on the Russian side. Why are they doing it? Well, it seems coherent with Putin's aim that it's a special military operation. He always said he wanted to secure the Donbass region. Looks like a frantic attempt to do that before the winter pause.
And looking at the wider situation around the country, where are we?
Yeah, well, the Russians are basically, the military are very short of soldiers, and they've been mobilising the reserve force, about 300,000. So the challenge is, how do you assimilate into that into the fighting? You can't use these reservists as standalone units because they wouldn't have any leadership or experience. So they've got to be used to augment existing units. One of the existing units is the army is a company. It's 100 people traditionally. Some of the Russian units are down to 6 to 8 people of that 100. That's all that survived. So it's a clear indication of how they need to bolster the number. When we're in Kharkiv, where the Ukrainians liberated Kharkiv, the Russians left a whole load of secret documents there, and they exposed the dreadful state of the combat effectiveness of the Russian forces, down at 11%, huge problems with morale and also logistics. So the Russian focus at the moment is to try and transition these 300,000 people into the front line, largely going from offence to defence. That's a pragmatic solution because these new soldiers are not well equipped, they're not well trained, and they certainly don't have battlefield experience. They're only really useful in defence. The downside of that, of course, is on a military perspective, you only prevail on the battlefield with a combination of initiative and momentum. As soon as you dig defensive positions, you are predictable and you are static. That hands the initiative to the Ukrainians, and I've no doubt Ukraine will seek to capitalise.
What make you of reports of potential support coming for Russia from Belarus?
Yeah, from a geographic perspective, Belarus and Ukraine obviously have a fairly extensive border here. And if I was trying to attack the seat of power at Kyiv, I'd rather do that from Belarus than I would from Russia. But Lukashenko has been a puppet, obviously a leader of Belarus, been a puppet of the Putin regime for some time. The Belarusian army is only about 15,000 strong, and to be brutally honest, Putin needs hundreds of thousands, not tens of thousands, and also a lot of equipment. But it's an interesting relationship between these two. So one example of that is that whilst we're suffering from high energy prices in the West, Putin is providing Lukashenko with gas at 5% of the market price, clearly trying to keep Lukashenko sweet. But on the flip side, 90% of the Belarusian population do not want to get involved in this war. So it's a real tightrope. If Putin fails, Lukashenko probably fails. What looks most likely is that whilst Belarus probably won't get involved directly in the fighting, they're definitely going to be enabling and supporting Putin's wider ambitions.
And you mentioned that for the Russians, the winter can't come soon enough. How do you see the next few months playing out?
Yeah, it's very difficult because ultimately this is Putin's plan. It's very difficult for us as analysts to work out exactly where he's going with this. For example, a week ago, we were watching heavy equipment leave Kherson to the west of the country, expecting the Russian forces to move out. Now it appears they're bolstering those forces and digging in, ready for a long fight. What we can say is the Russian military is spent, that they are digging in. But as to their future ambitions, we have to try and get inside Putin's head. And one of the ways of doing that is listening to his speeches. He did a speech at the Valdai Discussion Club only the other day. And this is what Interfax have reported. The fact that Russians and Ukrainians are fundamentally one people is a historical fact and been ripped apart for historical reasons. That plays well to a domestic audience, but it's completely incongruous with the actions of the Russian military on the ground that are flattening Ukrainian cities, devastated communities, stacking up loads of civilian casualties along the way. Definitely not the actions of a liberating force.